Conflict is inevitable in any marriage, but how you handle it can make all the difference.
In this episode, we're going to explore 3 biblical strategies to help transform your disagreements into growth with your spouse.
But first, like at the bottom of the video.
And subscribe to our channel.
Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Out of the Wilderness Ministries Podcast. I am your host, Derek McCoy.
And I'm your co-host, Andrea McCoy.
And I'm joined today by my beautiful wife, and I'm very excited, and we are very excited to do this podcast together today. And we're going to share with you today 3 biblical points that are out of Scripture about how to handle conflict as a husband and a wife. And I think that my wife would agree when I say that we have pretty good insight into conflict.
We are qualified to speak on this. We do have disagreements from time to time. But, sometimes it's been something over the years that we've had to definitely develop our conflict resolution strategies. And not only just conflict resolution strategies that you might use in your everyday life, but try to do them in a Christian way. It definitely takes fine tuning, and it's a work in progress. We always have room to grow.
Absolutely, we have room to grow as people, as always. But I think us in our marriage, I think that over time, we started out very young together. We really grew up together, right?
Truly, we started dating the summer after our sophomore year of high school, and so we've been together since then, and we're now 35. So a lot of years of growth for sure. And the people that we are today are very different than the people we are when we met. Yeah. And so I think sometimes when people get together as like adults, a lot of people these days, they don't get married until they're in their late 20s or into their 30s, and you're already such a different person by then. So to get with someone at such a young age and to develop habits at that age and then grow through all the phases that you go through from there till now, it can have some difficulties.
So what you're trying to say is I raised you from a pup, right?
That's what you say. It's one of your favorite sayings, matter of fact.
Yes, we grew up together in a lot of ways. We learned how to be adults together, and that comes with learning to be an adult is a conflict in itself, and then 2
Truly.
people growing into adulthood together, it is definitely a base for friction. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think as you grow as an adult, from really a child, at the time when we got together, I didn't feel like a child. I don't think anyone at 16 feels like a child, but you are, and we were.
Yeah.
So it's hard to not only grow yourself and figure out who you are as a person, and all those changes that you go through, and figuring out what you like and what you don't like, and to do that alongside someone else, and to continually choose that person in every version of that person. It takes effort to grow alongside each other, because I think a lot of people grow apart instead of together over the years. And it's a conscious thing. Because we could easily have allowed ourselves to grow apart, but you just kind of have to choose. It's not always something that's going to happen naturally. I think sometimes in marriages, people think, well, we just grew apart. That can happen to anyone. You have to make the conscious decision to grow together instead. And I'm not saying we've always got it right by any means. I don't want to sound like we've got this perfect marriage. We've definitely had our ups and downs, but it's a conscious effort. And above all of that is just having God at the center.
Absolutely. And, you went going back to a point you were making there, or dancing around anyway, was the act of choosing one another. And I think that's a great problem that exists within people in this day and time, especially, I guess, in our country, is that people have this Hollywood-based idea that everybody has that one person that you're meant to have, and if you choose the wrong person that you were meant to have, that you've messed up your whole life, and you've you've missed out on that opportunity, and then your marriage can't be good because you didn't find your one person, which leads to divorce rates that I believe are above 50% at this point. I haven't looked at the.
I don't know that they're that high,
They're
but I mean they're
close.
pretty high.
They're right at that 50% mark. They're plus or minus either way.
I love your Mado statistics.
I'm good at making
I
up
usually have
statistics.
to rein Derek in on his statistics. So I don't know what the actual rates are.
I know at one point it was in the high 40s. I'm thinking that I've seen a study done not super long ago that actually had it crept up.
I think
to about
more so
51 or
now
52%.
is people are all out deciding they don't want to get married at all.
Yep.
Even I think that's something that's also on the rise. Even more than divorce is just people who are like, marriage isn't for me. I don't believe in the institution. I don't see the point. I think marriage in general, with this younger generation coming up, I think is kind of in it's kind of in danger of going out of style is to get married.
It's a big, and it stems from so many of these younger generation seeing their parents' failed marriage, and they've seen their parents' conflict and a poor lack of conflict resolution that more often than not, is resulting in a divorce at some point in their lives. And they're growing up in broken homes, and they are inevitably not choosing to be married because they have not seen the success of marriage. And where everybody fails at is that marriages work. There is no magical fairy tale. I mean, all that is, like I said, Hollywood based. That's in the movies. That's in the Disney productions that we watched growing up and whatnot. It is true that from a biblical standpoint, that a husband and a wife has to behave in a way that is scriptural, because there are prescribed ways that a husband and a wife should behave, because God has made us in roles. Mm-hmm. We are fitted into roles, and when we fit those roles well, there's freedom within the frames. Like, we are unique individuals. We have personalities that are differing of one another. We are our own thumbprints, right? They say there's fingerprints. I guess it's a better way to say it. Is fingerprints?
That would be the thumb.
Fingerprints, snowflakes. They're all unique. There's none like the other, and for the most part, that's true about people.
And I think Derek and I are a really good example of two people who, by all means, kind of our personalities clash just a wee bit. We're both kind of similarly. Both of us enjoy being the driver. Yeah. There are times when I want Derek, like, I hate to make decisions.
She wants. It gives me a lot of. She feels like being.
I don't like to make decisions, and I do like to rely on Derek for that, but like, we both just have such a similar personality, and we definitely do butt heads. So we can talk to you guys about we'll get into these points and some of the things that work for us, or just some experiences, because I think it's good to hear that not everything's perfect all the time, because I think some people just need encouraged that it is normal to have ebb and flow, up and down, and some encouraging words of what someone else is going through and what you can kind of come back from.
That brings us to our first point, which is listening with humility. And that scripture comes to us from James chapter 1, verse 19, where James, excuse me, I was thinking of 1 Timothy, but James is writing and says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God." I threw verse 20 in there on us.
Yeah. So being swift to hear. So I hadn't really thought about this verse like a ton. I don't know. That's something I've loved so much about the podcast. It's like we hear these verses, but when we actually do an episode really focusing on them, I mean, you probably do that a lot because you preach, but I'm not a preacher, so I don't do that as much or ever. So I do enjoy that about the podcast, is like actually breaking something down and figuring out how it applies to my life. Swift to hear means to focus on listening, obviously. And I mean, that sounds simple, but honestly, I feel like if we could listen with humility, that could really stop so many disagreements before they even have a chance to start. Because how bad are we to cut people off? I mean, I'm really bad at that, for sure.
old hillbilly proverb is, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth so that you can
I use
listen
many
twice
words
as
when few words do truth.
There you go. So you can listen twice as much as you speak. And the actual book of Proverbs in the Bible tells us that we should be, how's it word? We should be slow to speak, in ignorance, before we move all doubt. I messed that up completely, but basically it is that when we don't know what we're talking about and we're quick to speak and our mouth outruns our brain, we remove all doubt of our ignorance to the people around us.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we just say things. This has nothing to do with our marriage, but everything to do with what we're saying right here. So today we were shoe shopping with our kids, and we have a 12-year-old, and if you have never raised a 12-year-old boy before, they're very opinionated and moody. And so I was trying to help him pick a pair of shoes that I thought were going to look really good, and he was trying to pick these shoes that just were not, I just was not vibing with these shoes at all. And so we get up to the register and we're about to leave with no shoes because he just couldn't agree on a pair that, looked any count and that he could wear with all of his outfits. And I said, well, if you just want to keep wearing those weird sandals, then fine, we won't get you any shoes. And that just came out like quick to speak. And, after he went back and they told us we could buy one, get one. So we was like, well, let's go back and make sure. We walked in with 4 pair after that. But anyway, he said afterward, he was like, well, I guess I'm not wearing these sandals anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? At that point, I kind of already forgot I said it.
I didn't hear you.
And he said, well, you told me they were weird. And I was like, ooh. I said, well, Owen, I said I should not have said that. I was aggravated at the moment because I couldn't get you to agree on any of these shoes. And I said weird, but I shouldn't have said it. They're not weird. They are cute. I just wanted you to not have to wear sandals all the time with every outfit. Yeah. I wanted you to have some tennis shoes. Yeah. I said, do you forgive me? And he was like, yeah, I forgive you. And I mean, I felt terrible about it, but that's just a good example of saying stuff too fast. We say things that we just don't mean. I don't think the sandals are weird at all, but I said weird sandals. It's just like when you're arguing with your spouse, if you're going to just say that first thing that comes to your mind, a lot of times we're just trying to cut somebody, we're trying to hurt their feelings because we're feeling aggravated or in a disagreement. But I don't think we really struggle with that part anymore. But when we were younger, we were so bad to do that. Just try to be like, however we could.
And I'm a cutter by nature anyway, so it just made it worse. And I think that we really hashed that out. Particularly in recent years, where we just kind of sit down and talked about how, we did grow up together and we did learn marriage at such a young age, and we just got so accustomed as younger people, kind of cutting each other to the bone and saying things that were on our minds, that as we got older, it became unhealthy.
Terrible habit.
A terrible habit.
We have had, honestly, over the last few years, the last year and a half.
That's a 2 now.
Okay. Well, we have been through a full transformation, and I mean, just trying to make really conscious efforts. And it's almost like so cringe to look back and think about like the way that we were talking to each other, because I don't feel like we really even do that anymore now. Yeah. Like and that's all through Jesus. Like he absolutely had to change that bad habit from the inside out, because it's the kind of thing where it's really hard to change yourself on the inside. Your thought process, the things that you're saying, your habits, your go-to response to things. It's very hard to change that.
Yeah.
But it's something that if you can't hear your spouse out and try to, because how often would we do that? And then after we would maybe blow up, be like, oh, well, I misunderstood you. I mean, and if you blew up over a misunderstanding, and I mean, you had this whole long argument where you say things you don't mean, you hurt the other person's feelings, and sometimes it's hard to forget that stuff like right away. You almost it's time to say sorry. It's over, but you're so aggravated over the stuff that you just heard that you can't even hardly get there. And it was stuff that was so pointless anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing as human beings in general, some people probably struggle with it more. I definitely probably struggled with it as a younger person until I realized it was really a thing, is that you listen to respond, right? And so in general conversation or with your spouse and significant other, there's a tendency to be in a conversation where the other person's talking, and
You're waiting for them to be quiet.
and you're just waiting for them to be quiet because you got something that you want to say.
Yeah, and you're not even fully listening to what they're
Exactly.
saying. You're just waiting for your chance to talk.
Right. And so, when your wife comes to you and has something that, that is troubling her, like when you come to me and you've got something that's really bothering you, there's oftentimes that, like, I feel like those things are, not really something that should be stressed over. Right? They're
That
simple
is one of
problems.
our main problems that we deal with in the here and now.
Yeah.
Is I'm a overanalyzer,
Yeah.
and Derek's an underanalyzer. I think that's a fair.
I think it's fair.
Okay, so therefore, when I'm overanalyzing on something and really picking it apart, and I'll do it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and that's just my process. And Derek, even the first time, was annoyed with it. So by the time we get to round 4, you're just like, ready to strangle me.
It does happen, and there is a tendency to do one of probably two things, which is because I am not taking you serious enough with whatever your problem
You're
is.
aggravated from the moment I start.
My response is either too short, whereas if I would just take the moment to give you a more well-formed answer, maybe the third and fourth
It
question
would shush
would
me.
come.
Yeah, not shush
question.
me, but it would
Satisfy
get,
you.
yeah, it would
Satiate
satisfy
what
me.
you're
That's what I'm
after.
saying, yeah.
And then there's sometimes, when, I don't listen intently enough because maybe it's a lingering thing, something you've been stressed over for a couple of days, and I've been like, it's going to be fine, XYZ, whatever it is. And then day 3, I'm kind of eyes glossed over. And
If y'all can't tell, I struggle with anxiety. So yeah, I probably do come to you a lot with stuff. And I know that when I start that you're going to be not wanting to hear it, but you're my person. So of course I bring it to you.
And vice versa. I think that, you might have the stress anxiety portion, which is not my language, but I have the anger language, which is not your language, right? So I can get upset and twerk about something. I can just see your eyes roll into the back of your head because you would like to strangle me.
The drama.
But to me,
drama is so strong.
But to me, it feels like an appropriate response.
Right. That's true. I hadn't really thought about that, but that might feel appropriate to you in that moment, even though it feels totes inappropriate to me.
Right.
But it's feeling, right to you in the moment.
Right.
And that's something you should think about for me too, though. We're having a breakthrough right now. If you guys can tell.
Therapy session out of the wilderness.
Is that you should think that this feels right to me in my mind when I'm coming to you with something for the 5,000th time.
And 10 years ago, there was no consideration of that.
Yeah.
The last few years, my mind does go to those places. It doesn't always, of course. But
It's gotten better. No one's perfect.
No, but I think fast forward 10 years from now, maybe it is more of a thing, and that's where we talk about marriage being a struggle and it being work, and you've just got to put those years and that time in, because if you nurture this thing, there's fruit in a healthy marriage. And,
Absolutely.
and we've definitely seen that over the last few years. And so, as far as listening goes, going back in going into the text here, it says, be swift to hear. So, we need to start hearing one another, right? As a married couple, is that should be our goal, is that even when, to sum up the first thought of this point, is that even when, the response or the thought or the nature of the idea, the situation, or what's going on, that's the word for situation, is going on, is that we still need to take that moment and hear what the other person is saying. You have to be able to hear so that in response, you can speak something that is healthy, that's beneficial to that person, because we are two halves of a whole. God made us man and woman coming forth from the flesh of the man. We two are joined in one body together, one flesh. And although, yes, me and you are different in a lot of ways, and the old adage is opposite attracts. I see some marriages where it seems like those two people like all the same things. You know what I mean? And me and you don't necessarily like all the same things or speak all the same languages or this, that, or the other. And that does create conflict between us. But as we have gotten older and grown together, I
think we've morphed into the same person.
I think we have. Honestly, you just kind of become similar people. You learn to speak a similar language, and as time goes on, you just do.
When you make a conscious effort to learn how your spouse wants to be, like when I come to Derek with something that's bothering me, it's about me in that moment. Well, when Derek comes to me with something that's bothering him, it's about him in that moment. And in that moment, it's not about how I feel that we should be talking about it. But if it's something you're bringing to me, then it's kind of, it's
important to me.
Right. I should, kind of listen and honor the way that you feel it needs to be discussed in that moment. I mean, unless it's, obviously we don't mean if your spouse wants to come at you and yelling and that's how they feel, that's not what I mean.
Healthy. It's just flat healthy. We're talking about a healthy way to listen and speak to one another. And ultimately what a marriage is supposed to do is that even though me and you are opposites, I feel like we complement one another. Because it's like you said, I'm down here, you're up here, we're here and there, we're east and west, north and south, but what is in the middle of all those things, right? We're complementing one another. That
Jesus, hopefully.
Well, definitely Jesus, but you're pulling me up to a level where I need to be more concerned about whatever the situation is, where I might be tethering you down to reality. The situation is not necessarily as big as what it seems, but it is still important. And that's where we can be swift to hear, slow to speak. And the last part that
I wanted to say something else about slow to speak. Sometimes being slow to speak might even mean in your marriage that you need to take a beat.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to discuss that at that moment. You just need to take a second. And I think that applies to even with our kids or with your spouse or with anyone or even a family member or a friend or anyone you're having conflict with. Sometimes it's good to just take a second.
Yeah.
Don't speak. Like if I tell you something and it just makes you furious, maybe don't discuss it right up. Just be like, and I'm not saying take an hour because I'm telling you when I need to talk about it, I need to talk about it. But sometimes it might be good to just give you 5 minutes. For a minute.
Circle
and then usually I have found one thing I do like about you, and I'm not like this whatsoever. I'll admit it. Is that when we argue, once we've fully hashed it, you're ready to just kiss and make up right at that moment, and you're able to hug me and be sweet and stuff. But it takes me so much time to get there. So really giving you a minute does benefit you, and it can completely end the thing. Yeah. I'm not as much like that. I need to be.
You got a couple things on that. You mentioned it. So first of all, that's a man's language. So two guys can be really, really angry at one another, have it out, fist fight, whatever, and then hug at the end of it and be bros again, right? That's just how men honestly work.
Women ain't like that.
No. One thing that I've come to know in my life, and I try to apply this at times, and increasingly so in our marriage, is that, say when I was younger and we'd have a home project, I'd be using a saw, putting something together, building something, whatever it is, and not quite go my way. I had a definite tendency that I was ready to break whatever it is and just walk away from it if it wasn't going to go together. Of course, YouTube has come along. Shout out. But YouTube,
that does, what a help that is.
Yeah, YouTube comes along. I can watch a how-to. I can say, okay, this is what I'm doing wrong. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
I can't really do that with you. But here's the thing that I can apply to our marriage is that if things are not quite going my way, I can just walk away from it for a minute. Sometimes I can come in, get me a drink, get a bite,
Food
or
makes
just
a
go
big
piddle,
difference.
go piddle, do something else, and then come back to it. I might come back to it in 5 minutes. I might come back to it an hour. I might come back to it tomorrow. Depends on how I'm at.
Yeah.
And so that's
You know, when
something
Derek's
I try
like
to
still
apply.
feeling iffy the next day, it's serious because normally you don't.
Usually
It's
I
not
sleep
like that.
Like at the
Yes, you can. You can sleep and you can wake up a whole new person.
yeah.
And I'll just like you'll wake me up so sweetly, and I'll immediately open my eyes and I'll immediately remember and I'll look at you like you.
Yes, and that's what I try to do. Is like when I wake up the next morning, if we've been in a tiff the day before, and the Bible says, "Don't let the sun go down on your wrath." And I think
We've gotten way better at
we
that
typically try to come
because we
back
used
to
to
a
just
neutral state,
back to back.
but we can still be
anger.
mad at each other in a neutral state. Go to bed. I can wake up the next morning and just be like, what is this really? I mean, who
Yeah.
really cares? And I can come over and I can give you that little bit of sweetness because that is your love language. I can be that extra little bit of sugar on you, and that can help you pull back to where you need to be.
Mm-hmm. So the slow to wrath. What do you want to say about that?
Well, that it kind of segues us good into that point is that God gives us grace, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the misconception of grace is that God has always had a grace because He knew that His Son would die upon the cross of Calvary. That's true in God's foreknowledge, but it's not true in His actions, right? God exists outside of time and space and is not tethered by time, but we are. God is not a time traveler. God did not wait until Christ resurrected from the grave and then apply grace backwards through time. That's not how God works. God is merciful first. And so God gives mercy unto His creation. And He gave mercy all the way from Adam to David, all the way to Christ, that John the Baptist being, kind of that final segue. And He gave that mercy, and upon Christ's resurrection, Christ went to the belly of the earth. If God put grace backwards, they would not been in the belly of the earth. They would be to wherever they're at now. And the Bible doesn't tell us where He carried them away to. He just says, carried them away. So God gave mercy first, which brought upon grace through Christ, which we now have salvation through grace. In marriage, so being slow to wrath, God was slow to wrath. He was long suffering. He's still long suffering to me. And He has compared Himself and His relationship with us to a marriage. We are the bride of Christ.
Yeah.
And God is the head of the man. Man is the head of the woman. Woman is head of the household, right? With the children. And so there is an overarching umbrella, and God has given us a pattern of how we should be. And we should be Christ-like as Christians. So there's all kinds wrapped up into how this applies to marriage. And we should be slow to wrath with one another because God has been slow to wrath with us. If we got our just due, we would have been stamped out long ago because I deserve hell, right? That is what I deserve, but God has not given me that. And although I'll use me, I won't use you, there have been plenty of times in our marriage where I deserved the fullness of Andy's wrath, and I've received some of Andy's wrath at times.
Only a taste.
But I wouldn't say that I've ever received the fullness because we wouldn't be together today.
That's true.
And so,
I guess that's the full. That's like the full
yes,
worst thing that can happen is divorce. And if you haven't done that, then you know that you've at least, stuck it out. And then that's saying something because right now that's kind of like the easy button.
Yep.
I want out. I mean, it's not easy. I understand when people go through divorce, it's hard and it takes a lot out, and that's not something that a lot of people want to do.
But it prevents them from the work that they don't want to do. They would rather do,
or that they're convinced can't be fixed.
Yeah, that too.
And that and obviously, if you're in a relationship with someone who's being abusive, that doesn't really apply here. But two Christians, by all means, need to work it out.
Yeah, a Christian and a lost person, there's different rules to that, for which Paul lays out that if the unbelieving spouse wants to leave, let them leave. But they're sanctified by the believing spouse, so this believing spouse should stay. But an abusive relationship and that, two Christians should not be abusive to one another.
Right, something's bad wrong.
There's something bad wrong in somebody's salvation if there's abuse going on. So there's a different way to rectify that. But going back to the point is, God is long-suffering to us. He is first merciful and then presents his grace. And so, I can give you, or you can give me, a space of mercy. Like, maybe he didn't necessarily mean what he said. Let me give him a second chance here. So we can be merciful, and we can give each other a space to repent, right? That's what God did in the Old Testament, and that's what he does to us, is he gives us just that space to repent before he is in action to create repentance within us or destruction. And so, firstly, we can have mercy towards one another, but there are also times when Andy might be going through something, and I need to give her grace.
That's what I was going to say, is giving someone the benefit of the doubt. There's a lot of times that I'll tell Derek, I feel like you said this, and I think that was really mean, and you're like, I didn't mean it like that at all.
Right.
And I might have perceived it that you meant it that way, but sometimes we have to give people the benefit of the doubt. You have to do that a lot in marriage, because sometimes, perception is reality to the person, but that doesn't mean that that's, exactly how you meant it or whatever. And so we need to try to have, humility is like what we were saying, is trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, try to hear them out fully. And, if they say that's not what I meant, then, take a minute to try to, because I'm bad to be like, well, that's what you said. Yeah, I am bad to do that. But just take a second and try to hear the other person's point of view and hear them out.
Yeah. And so it is very good for the husband and the wife to be swiftly first to hear, and listen, not to respond, but listen to understand.
Yes.
So that, secondly, you can be slow to speak and also slow to wrath, to be able to give somebody mercy and grace, so that you can resolute that conflict in a healthy Christian manner. So that brings us to our second point, which is responding with love. That comes to us out of the book of Ephesians, chapter 4. Verse 29 says, "Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers, and grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby ye are sealed unto the day of redemption." And so that word corrupt, so let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. And so we could take that a few odd end ways. But I would go the route of saying that we shouldn't talk down or vulgar towards one another. We touched a little bit on name calling in the previous point, cutting, but this kind of dives deeper into that, and that we should not allow ourselves to get to that point, right? It's, we talked a little bit about it in the previous point about wrath as part of listening and speaking, and not being wrathful, and so this just kind of dives deeper into that point where we're going to respond in love. Right, we're going to be responsive in love. So the first one was to be slow to speak, and we should listen twice as much as what we say.
So first it's about listening, now it's about speaking.
Listening to respond, exactly. So we're going to listen to respond, and we are going to respond in love as a married couple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and think with our spouse. We need to hold them to a higher regard than anyone else, really, because, God calls you to be with your spouse as one. So we need to be really conscious of how we're speaking to our spouse, and really make a good effort to respond with kindness, and to really think about the things that you're going to say, how they're going to make the other person feel. Is this going to hurt their feelings? Is this going to... I don't care to say, even before we started this podcast, Derek said, think about maybe how you're speaking to me right now. And sometimes I don't probably think about it that way because, okay, so this is just me, what's going on in my head. I know that Derek knows that I love him. And I know he loves me. We've been together for such a long time that sometimes I just say whatever's in my mind, and I don't necessarily... I just assume that he's going to be able to brush it off. And I think a lot of the times you do brush it off, but it can get to everyone gets to a point where they're like, okay, like I get that way with you too. I think everyone gets to that point. And we just need to consider how what you're saying is really going to make the other person feel. Sometimes, and I have tried to get better at not saying things, and usually I'll say, I just felt something in. I just want you to know. I am working on it.
I have to know that she did refrain. That's
Yes,
funny.
that's how I get my praise.
Yes,
I did
yes.
refrain just now,
Yes.
so we know.
And what you were talking there about how we kind of snap or we kind of how we communicate basically. And so, some of that is your delivery, some of it's my perception. And it's really, really funny how, if you could peel back the curtain and watch us operate, is that, there are some days when, Andy will be a little snippy or whatever, and she's just the right amount of bratty that I find it cute. And so, like,
Hearing even.
yeah, and so I'm still trying to figure it out of how much that you can put weight towards. Is it your delivery? Is it my perception? Where do we fall upon that 60-40, 70-30? Because I don't think it's 50-50. It's one way or the other. I'm not sure which way the scales tip.
Yeah.
But there are days when I just can't handle it either, right? And I don't know whether it's maybe it's my mood, maybe it's just my perception. So many factors.
Well, today I could say something and it wouldn't bother you at all. And then tomorrow I could say it and it would just really, you can't know where the other person is with, and we are going to hurt one another's feelings. We can't read this scripture and be like, okay, well, I'm never going to hurt your feelings ever again. I mean, that's not practical.
Yeah.
We're just saying to try and consider the thoughts that you're, we can't control our thoughts as in shutting things down.
Yeah.
In your head before you say it. But as harder as it is to do that, it's much easier to control what you say because that's an act.
Absolutely.
That is voluntary. And sometimes we have thoughts that come to our mind that we're like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? That's harder to control.
Yeah.
But you can actually control what comes out and what goes into your spouse. And it says that we're to speak life into others. You know what I mean? I'm supposed to try to build you up. You're supposed to try to build me up.
Yeah.
And, saying ugly things to try to get at the other person is certainly not speaking life into the other.
I believe it says right here, you're talking about speaking life good, to which is the use of edifying.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, our speech towards one another is supposed to enlighten one another or give life, as the young kids say.
It's giving.
It's giving me life. But, yeah, so with this point, we shouldn't. It's like going back to what you were saying with the thoughts that pop into our mind. The Bible teaches us that we war against the flesh, but we don't war against the flesh with flesh. We war with the flesh by the Spirit. The Spirit is how we can put the flesh in subjection unto us. James also talks about the book that we just come out of, where he talks about bridling the tongue, how such a small rudder can steer a ship. Your tongue, what you say, yes, what you say matters far more than what you give it credit for. There's a lot of old wisdom that goes into the pen is mightier than the sword. I don't know if that was Shakespearean or if it precedes him or what. But what you say, the things that you can write about people, they carry a lot of weight that we don't give them credit for.
That's true.
It's one thing to take somebody's life with a sword, but it's another thing to tear them down with your tongue. And a husband and a wife should not be corrupt in that way towards their communication. And it can be easy to do. And what the Bible tells us is that the wickedness that we have as people, we can blame it on Satan all day long, but the Bible says we're laid away of our own lust. So he knows what carrots to entice us with, but those are the carrots that we like. And so it's us to blame at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so the things that pop into our mind, can be shocking at times, like where that comes from, like you said. But that comes from the flesh.
Right.
That comes from the old man who has died out, but we as Christians, can combat those things is we don't live in those thoughts.
Right.
The sin is not in thought. The sin is what you do with the thought. Do we dabble in that thought? Do we linger in that thought? Do we express that thought physically? Do I let that word of anger that comes to my mouth, those things that I want to say that I know is going to cut, or know might be corrupt, or might in that moment might feel like it would feel really great to say, but in reality, to watch it hurt you in such a manner would tear me down as well. But that also puts damage to our relationship.
Yes.
Those things,
over time, things build up. And something might not seem like the biggest deal right at first. While I'm talking on this, I'm going to let you go to Colossians 3:14, because that was another one. I don't know if you've looked at that, but it goes with this point.
Yeah, really.
But something that I was going to speak on, I forgot what was I saying just now before I said that? I had a point with that. But something else I was going to say is sometimes even less about, not to take anything away from the things that we say, but something also to think about, since we're just talking about, disagreements and things that we can have with our spouse, is not speaking. Cold shouldering someone.
Nonverbal communication. Absolutely.
That is, I think a lot of people turn to that.
Yep.
And that allows time to build up bitterness.
Yep.
And I know I said earlier, take a minute to think about it before you act, but I don't mean as in cold shoulder them. I just mean take a minute and be like, hey, we're both really heated right now. Let's take a second, think about this, cool off, and come back to it. But sometimes when people argue, they'll leave the house, drive, not tell them where they're going. We've never done that. I don't think we have ever done that.
I don't believe in that.
And I'm really proud of us for that we've never done that. But I mean, I know that that's sometimes, people's response. Or to just hang up and deny the call when the other person tries to call back. I'm guilty.
Yeah.
And then sometimes something that you might do in that regard would be that you would maybe really cold shoulder me.
Oh, yeah.
Get really quiet,
I was
really
king
silent.
Of the cold shoulder.
Derek, when he was younger, had a really good way of making me feel like a complete and total stranger.
Yeah.
Like he is just able to go stone cold. And that I hated that. And that was like your go-to. And I think that's something that we can do in our relationships that's really damaging over time. I mean, if that's a habit that you go to, you're not going to see you're not going to grow together like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not a healthy form of communication. And I that was always a go-to of mine was just going cold. I would cold shoulder you. I'd give you short responses
instead of talking it out.
Exactly.
And you've gotten way better at talking about your feelings. And I think that doesn't come natural for a lot of people, especially men.
Yeah.
It's just, and some men are all about talking about feelings, and some women are terrible at talking about their feelings. It's not just only, the case 100% of the time for men and women, but on the whole, I would say more men than women struggle with talking about their feelings.
Yeah, that's
and that was something that you have had to really work on, and you've gotten a lot better at it. And I don't know what it was about for you, because you obviously have the feelings because you talk about them now. I don't know what it is about a person that makes them feel like they're unable. And you might be someone might be listening to this podcast and they're like, hey, that's me. I'm not good at talking about my feelings. But I think even if you don't feel comfortable doing that with everyone, it's so important in your marriage to be able to tear down those walls, whatever it is, and have a real heart-to-heart with somebody.
It's about trust. I mean, it's about trust. We've talked about this a lot in the last few years of our marriage, about our ability to trust. And there's things that you trust me more with now, and there's things that I trust you more with now. One of those things is peeling back the layers and allowing, the inner thoughts to come out in a real way. You have to trust somebody to be that way.
Yeah.
And, I didn't.
I think you were worried that I would be angry.
Yeah, and I didn't grow up with a lot of trust. And some of it's, just different things of not of how you're raised or whatever, and different situations that you find yourself in.
Yeah, it definitely affects you. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, we are both proponents of one of those things, or I guess not proponent, that would be for something. We are, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but byproduct. There we go.
Oh my gosh, we just said the same word at the same time.
But we're byproducts of unhealthy marriages, right? We
or like fully of a marriage.
Yeah,
my parents never were married.
Exactly. So there's a lot of things that you witness as you grow up that creates unhealthy perceptions in your mind and how you are. And so I never witnessed a healthy marriage, and therefore, I didn't know how to be a healthy husband. And so, we experienced those things together. And one of those unhealthy habits was cold shouldering, which didn't edify you. It served to put cracks in the foundation of our marriage.
Well, when you're cold shouldering someone, you're maybe doing that to me out of distrust. And in turn, you cold shouldering me chips away at the trust I have for you, because I'm like, you want to be married to someone who feels like your person, who feels like your rock, who feels like, hey, I can go to them and the world might be against me right now, but I've got my spouse.
Yep.
And you might feel like, there's no one else that you can turn to with just how you truly are feeling. And if you feel like that person could at any minute just turn it off and completely, X you off for the day, then that's not healthy. Right. You can't trust someone like that. You have not done that in a very long time.
Yeah, that's something I've definitely tried not to
do. A lot of it is growth with age. But I know some really immature older people too. I think a lot of it is just, it takes Jesus and, really working and a lot of prayer to kick a lot of your bad habits that you develop over time. I mean, certainly I've had to pray over a lot of different things. And I still do, but it just, God has to be able to change. God is the only person who can change someone from the inside out for the good. And, lost people, I think sometimes if they make strides or growth or something, God might be working in their life to try to point them in the right direction or something. You can't take God out of the equation.
It rains on the just and on the unjust a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there are things that benefit both sides of that. But, no corrupt communication. It's not good to tear one another down. That is both verbal and nonverbal, just like you said. And it is the job of the husband to build up the wife, and in turn, it's also the job of the wife to build up the husband, that we edify one another. We give each other life, we give each other assurance, we give each other a trusting foundation that we can have an assurance in, and that's what builds, a strong marriage. You're able to build upon that trust.
Yes. So, do you want to read Colossians 3:14?
Yep. Colossians 3:14, and above all things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also ye are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Yep. And so, the peace of God ruling in our hearts, going back to the verse 14, putting on charity. And so charity is we
think of charity, we think of
we're reading out of the King James, and so there's a little bit lost in the Old English language as opposed to our current English slang, which is charity actually by definition is love. And so we are supposed to cherish one another or put on charity, that we love one another. And so Paul is writing to the church at Colossae here, and it says, put above all things that we should have on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. So a husband and a wife has a bond, and to achieve a bond of perfectness, in between all that, you have to have love. And the thing that's lost on the world is what love is. Going back to what we were saying about the Hollywood perfection of the one and all this stuff. The reality is that marriage takes work, and that love is achieved through growth together. And so love is unnatural to the unbeliever. I know now as a saved person that I never actually understood love. And I knew that as an unsaved person, but I didn't understand the reality of not knowing it. I just, love was a mystery to me of what love was. And then as a saved person, having the love of Christ within me, in my life, I understand love and continue to understand it on deeper levels. And so the love in a marriage has to be founded not upon the chemical reaction of our brains as what we perceive as an emotion of love. It is the foundation of Christ that is within the marriage, who is the head of the husband and the husband being head of the wife, that we are in one body is what Paul is talking about here, that we are in the bonds of perfection and having the peace of God in our marriage.
And it says that, a husband should love his wife like Christ loves the church.
Yes.
And so that's to give you a picture of the kind of love and closeness that you should have with your spouse. It shouldn't be the sort of thing that can be thrown down and picked back up with someone else. The bond that you have with your spouse, you need, and we've certainly not always had that, but I would say now that, we have a very close bond that I can't even imagine having with anyone else.
Yep.
It's something that's really serious and really special. And it's not something that, well, if we break up tomorrow, I can, find someone else and it'll be just as good. I mean, what you have with them should have that's why God ordains marriage to be so important as it is because it is a bond that you have with someone that, is supposed to be unlike your bond with anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Paul in this portion of Scripture is writing to the church as a whole. So this is not marriage specific. This is Christian specific.
Mm-hmm.
And so he is writing here to Colossia, and he is talking about fellowship one with another. And that is something that a husband and a wife for sure should have. But in order to have true fellowship between a husband and a wife, you have to have fellowship with God. If God is not at the center of your marriage, there is a lack in that. And
Mm-hmm.
whether you be unsaved or saved, you can still have a lack of God in your marriage. And we're mostly speaking to Christians here upon this foundation, and that's something that probably is lost amongst a lot of marriages is fellowship between a husband and a wife. Fellowship is on two levels. One level is fellowship with God and man, right? So we collectively should have a bond of peace with God, that we should together have fellowship with Christ, because we are one flesh.
Right.
So Paul says one flesh here, but he's talking about one body, excuse me. He's talking about one body. He's talking about the body of the church. But we are one flesh as husband and wife. We
Right.
are one body, spiritually speaking. And therefore, we should have a fellowship collectively together with God. But secondly, we should have a fellowship one with another. Not every husband and wife has all the same activities they like to do. Not everybody likes to go golfing or hiking or maybe be into the movie nights or gaming, or the spectrum is broad. And so not every person likes the same things, but there's common ground amongst everybody, right?
You have to make that certain time. You have to set it aside. And I think in life as parents and with work and stuff, it can be hard to set that special time aside for someone. With Derek and I, we kind of don't spend very much time apart ever, really. But even that, it's nice to take time outside of everything else, aside of just being at home in the mundane, and to go out and maybe, even if it's go to Lowe's and go out to dinner together, just have that special time with someone, work on that bond that's just between the two of you.
Absolutely.
But I think that I enjoy that. I enjoy that you and I always want to spend our time, and everyone likes to do their own thing. Sometimes everyone needs to unwind and take a beat. But I do enjoy, spending the amount of time that we do together. I feel like we're it's like I said earlier, we've almost meshed into the same person over the years. The same, we do complete each other's sentences all the time and say the same thing at the same time. It's pretty funny, but I guess that's what happens when you're together for as many years as we are.
And I know a lot of, particularly husbands, but I think it goes both ways. I know a lot of husbands who enjoy getting that away time. You know what I mean? And
you used to enjoy it a bit more.
When I was younger,
you like to have your you time.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I didn't really think of that, but And maybe
It wasn't much, but
no.
I mean, you did.
Yeah, I did. But at the same time, I've not ever really been a hobby person. Everybody's got a hobby. There's a lot of people who hunt or fish or golf or whatever. And I like to do those things, but it's not something that I'm trying to up and leave y'all for
Right.
hours. That actually gives me a lot of anxiety to be gone for that long, and that's just, I don't relate to that. And
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with those things, I guess. But the point I'm trying to make is I think that some people take that to an unhealthy level. I might be the pendulum on the other side. I might be an unhealthy clean
Right.
person.
Well, I was going to give you a little praise. Oh, I think it is good to have some things outside of just the same thing all the time. Because I mean that can cause some room for some friction. Because everyone can wear on other people, and I think it's funny, and I have to bring this up since this is the Out of the Wilderness podcast. But Derek's never really been much of a friend person. He's never been someone who likes to enjoy his time with anyone but me. I've always said, our kids will ask Derek, "Who's your best friend?" And he'll be like, "Mommy," really. And I've always encouraged him because I do think it's important to have some friendships and godly friendships. Who, if you're having a problem or you're maybe needing, to talk to someone about something, I think it's good to have that. And so Derek and Owen, the other member of the Out of the Wilderness podcast, I hear them, talk about their problems and troubleshoot and build a good friendship. And I think that's good to have someone, because if you're going to be in a Christian marriage, and sometimes we do just need some outside, guidance or help. I think it's good to have that person also be a Christian who can, give you, the direction to go. That would be what God would want you to do or whatever. So, I mean, as much, I don't want people to think I think it's good just to be obsessed with your husband all the time and never do anything else. I think it's good to have other friendships too, but I think we need to be mindful of what those friendships are, where they're going to point us, and how they're going to affect our marriage. I mean, if your girlfriend wants you to go out with her 4 days out of the week and wants you to stay with her at Target for hours and you're never at home and you never see your husband, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. Just the same with your husband. Like if your husband is hunting 5 days a week and he's gone all day long and you never even see him and you just see him in passing, that wouldn't work for me. I mean, maybe it works for some people, but for me, I would feel really neglected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so a marriage has to have some degree of fellowship, which is both worship, but it's also on a friendship basis, right? We have to have some degree of friendship with our spouse
to have fun together.
Truly be healthy. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that brings us to our third and our final point, which is to forgive quickly.
An important one.
And so that comes to us once again out of Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 6 says...
26.
Did I say 6? Oh,
yeah.
26. My bad.
I got you.
See, thank you, help me. Be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. And so, ultimately, your spouse is in need, right? We're two halves of a whole. And so we separate, we're different people, but we together collectively, are one body. And so we need one another. In fellowship with the Lord, in life, God looked down in the garden when he made Adam and said, "It's not good that man is alone." And that is where the woman came forth out of the man, that to be that helpmeet. And so it's not good, as we said earlier, that we should let the sun go down upon our wrath. And what that does ultimately is when we cold shoulder one another, when we speak corruptly to one another, when we don't listen and we don't respond the way we're supposed to, we're given spaces for the devil to get into the cracks, get into the creases and the crevices. And ultimately, he is like a chisel or a wedge with a hammer, to where as he hammers into these areas of weakness, he ultimately brings the wall potentially down to crumble. And a lot of people do crumble under that.
So that's actually kind of what I was going to say. So without, forgiveness is like the key of keeping the peace in your marriage.
Yep.
And when you're not forgiving someone, it leaves the door open for like bitterness and division in your marriage. And I think sometimes it's not good to like linger on something that you haven't really forgiven, but you just bury it deep down inside and you just think you can get past it, because inevitably that is still building up inside, and that can still cause a lot of issues in your marriage. And I think being able to forgive something that maybe feels serious to you, if you're not doing that, you're not going to be able to trust the other person. And that's what we were saying earlier, about trust being so important. And if you can't have trust, then you can't have that be your person. If you don't feel like you can trust them fully with yourself, trusting someone fully with yourself in your marriage, you're giving your heart to someone.
Yeah.
And if someone breaks your heart or someone leaves you in your marriage, that absolutely turns your world upside down. So to fully give your heart to someone, that is really one of the biggest things that you can do in this life.
Absolutely.
Because like with my children, they are my flesh and blood. You are a stranger that I met one day and we decided to get married. And, there's no connection between us other than we're married. We're not family. If you and I split ways, it's over. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Sometimes I think about that. I'm like, two people find each other, complete strangers, and you put full trust in that person. A lot of people don't do that, but I'm just saying, ideally, you're able to put full trust in that person. And it just kind of like blows my mind sometimes that we're able to do that. But I feel like I know you completely.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you feel like you know me completely.
Absolutely.
And there are these, I think about the Chris Watts story sometimes and how she probably felt like she knew her husband completely.
Yeah.
And people come together and get married. And I mean, just like these crazy things happen. So you want to feel like you give your spouse full trust. And, in the last couple of years, Derek and I both worked through something that was so old and gone. Not necessarily gone, but, things that both of us had kind of held on to. And truly, through a lot of prayer and a lot of just like literally pulling everything down to just bare bones, fully laid it all out there, finally said the things that maybe sometimes you're scared to say. I think that's a good idea, is to be able to have really candid discussions with your spouse. Don't hold something in, because if you can't tell your spouse what you're thinking or feeling, who can you tell? So I think it's good to be able to say, hey, you know what? The real truth is I'm feeling this way about this. And, I think a lot of the times it goes better than you think it will. And you're absolutely, if you keep God at the center of that, you're going to see the fruits of that in your marriage when you work through that. I'm not going to say that I can tell you some really deep thing and then you're going to be like, okay, good. I love you so much. This was a great talk. And then you're like, tomorrow you're just going to be hunky-dory. Sometimes there's things that you can talk about and it might take you weeks or even a couple months to fully weed through that.
Yeah.
But the thing is to stick it out and to keep having those conversations, keep coming back, keep checking in, keep doing it as long as it takes until you get to the bottom of it, until you can actually look at that person and say, I actually do forgive you. And it can feel like the biggest weight coming off of your chest. And it can truly allow, you don't even realize how much that's clouded your marriage until you get rid of it. And then you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Then you can truly feel peace, trust, happiness, all of that. And it all revolves around forgiveness.
Absolutely. And, like we were saying, it gives those things where we linger and hold on and we communicate unhealthily. We're letting the devil into, and we're supposed to have God at the center of our marriage. And I say this a lot. And it seems like I've been saying a lot lately, but this is something that I use a lot in my own life. is that, we are a vessel to the living God. Particularly our heart is how the Bible describes it. And the heart of itself is deceitful and it's wicked and it's exceedingly, against God, is how the Bible says. But when God converts us into a new creature, he places within us a new heart. And that heart is a vessel for the Holy Spirit. And when we are filling that vessel with godly things, we have God in our vessel. And when we go to draw out of that vessel, we're drawing out God. But when we allow other things to come into our lives or our marriages, the things that are going to escape out of that vessel, in this one flesh, one body, is going to be things that are not godly, that are against God, that don't have godly righteousness that Paul is writing to the Ephesians here. He is saying that, not to let the sun go down on our wrath here. And so we have to forgive quickly. And, we've been saying this quite a bit, is that, sometimes you have to give space. When we say forgive quickly, I mean, obviously, you can't always, we're humans and God knows this, and we can't just turn and say, I forgive you. We have to work through some things to get that to that state of forgiveness. However, sometimes I can still go to bed and we still be a little mad. I wouldn't consider that necessarily letting the sun go down on wrath, right? But we go to bed not completely resolute.
If you're not able to go, good night, love you.
Yeah.
You can't even say love you.
Yeah.
That's going to bed on your wrath.
That's right.
But you have to be able to be like, you know what, I'm aggravated at you right now, but I love you. Good night. See you in the morning. I'll be here.
Still want to see you in the morning.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the difference there, for sure.
Exactly. And so we have to come to a state of forgiveness, and we can still work through things, and we can still maybe be a little bit in a tiff and things, but I can forgive you, maybe not move on yet, but we can forgive one another and then still work through our stuff and then come back to that state of being back good, because Jesus forgives us and he forgives quickly, and therefore we should forgive one another swiftly as well. And so, Christ forgives us upon our confession, right? But we still have to learn and grow. That's where some of the other things we've talked about, is mercy and grace and all these things come into play, is that Christ forgives us up front, but we still have to work through those things with him. And
and it's not a one-time thing. Just like with marriage, it's a continual thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're going to continue to mess up.
Yeah.
God's going to continue to forgive. And just like in our relationship with God, whenever we sin, we shouldn't continue in that sin,
right,
and just ask forgiveness. We shouldn't do something that really hurts our spouse, ask them to forgive us for it, and then a few weeks later do that same thing again and ask them to forgive us for it, and then 6 months later, a year later, you know what I mean? That's the kind of thing, just like with God. He says to continue not in that sin. So we shouldn't do something and know, hey, do something initially that, you shouldn't have done. You ask God to forgive you. He forgives you. And then you're like, well, you know what? I know he'll forgive me, so I'll just do that again.
Right.
That's not what we're supposed to do.
Exactly.
And it's just like in your marriage. And I never really thought about it like that.
That's a good point.
But just like in our marriage, we shouldn't do those things that we know is a sin in our marriage, something against our spouse. Do that time and time and time again. Because you know what? Your wife and your husband is not God. God is quick to forgive. He is just and merciful. He is long-suffering. But we are human beings, and it can get hard over time to continue to forgive the same thing over and over and
Absolutely.
over.
Yep.
We're only human.
So I've really enjoyed this conversation with you and enjoyed going through some of our topics here. If you want to sum up our thoughts for the day.
Yes, so we learned about listening with humility, responding with love, and forgiving quickly. So these are things that I think that you and I can certainly continue to apply to our marriage. Things that we have applied to our marriage, tried and true. Definitely stuff that can bring about really good change in your relationship with your spouse.
Yep. We hope that this episode has been a blessing to you. And remember to like the video at the bottom of your screen, subscribe to our channel, follow us for more content like this, more episodes. We desperately need your support. We want to take the message of Jesus Christ as far as we can, go beyond our church walls, and we want to make sure that people who don't necessarily always hear the gospel or the actual gospel, right, is hearing
Right.
it. And so it is the mission of the Wilderness Ministries to take the unwavering gospel of Jesus Christ to an ever-changing world.
And it is Romans 10:14 says, "How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher?"
Till next time, friends.
Bye.